Hello and welcome back. I hope you had a nice lunch or morning or afternoon break, depending on or evening break, depending on where you are based, because we have people from all over the world. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you also managed to go and check the demo that Mentimeter did on their booth, because it was really, really insightful. Even for me, I didn't know some of the functionalities that they showed were possible. But now to the important things, very, very important things on our track. We are going to go into the details of rehearsing our presentations, rehearsing our speech, and why this is so important. I call it the magic pill because a lot of people are like, what is the magic pill when you have to deliver your presentation? Well, the magic pill is to definitely rehearse it. And I cannot imagine someone better to present that topic than Cliff Kennedy. So Cliff Kennedy has been creating high impacting audience experiences for more than 30 years, working with companies like Zoom, like Typeform, companies like Amazon and Gartner. He's been helping them make their presentations more impactful and rehearse in the most effective way. So, hi, Cliff. We are so excited to have you, and I'm sure that our audience is very much looking forward to seeing what you have prepared for us.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's so great to be here with all of you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as they say in virtual preparation land. To be honest with you, there's no place in the world I'd rather be than right here, right now, with all of you. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Benjamin Franklin was one of the founding fathers of the United States, and he's very well known for his witty sayings. And one of them is, he says, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail, which is basically what rehearsal is all about, right? If you're not rehearsing and working on getting better, you are going to either be the same as you are, or worst case, actually, not do very well. And so rehearsal success with what I call it, because actually it kind of goes hand in hand with my preparation techniques. So there's content success, which is obviously you're going to have great content, your messages, your vision, your script, all those great things. But it doesn't mean anything until you actually deliver it. And by rehearsing your delivery is how you're going to achieve greater results from every presentation that you have. So this is what we're here to talk about: rehearsing. And my, I always joke when I start working with a client that my evil plan is to come in and kind of shift your whole, your culture and your perspective about what presentation is. So, today I'm here to change your perspective about rehearsing. And by shifting this perspective, you can look at rehearsing in a new way. And by getting this new way, you're going to have different expectations. So instead of, getting through a presentation and not screwing up, which is a great expectation. You're going to go in this presentation and you're going to blow people's minds, and that's, a different expectation. And then by doing that, eventually you're going to change your results, right? You may not, all minds may not be blown. Everyone may not, be perfect. You're not going to get everything, but you are going to get more now with this new perspective. You're going to get better results. So I'm not going to call myself Benjamin Franklin, but I have a lot of witty sayings too, and I tend to do as a coach. So, and my big belief is that every time a speaker stands before an audience, great things are possible. So, this talks about this whole idea of this, human potential and what we can do, right? So, if we get aligned behind a vision, if we know we understand a problem that we need to solve, we can do it together. And by presenting in the best possible way that you can, you're going to help contribute to these great things happening. So, again, this is this beginning, this shifting of perspective of, this isn't, hey, I'm not rehearsing just so that I can, get through this presentation without messing up or making a mistake. I'm rehearsing this I'm sorry. I'm still going too fast in the morning, my coffee. So I'm rehearsing for this presentation because I want to do something that's beneficial for my audience, that I'm going to make a difference for them. I'm going to help them and me and everyone involved do great things. Because the important thing from a perspective standpoint is you don't rehearse for yourself, right? You rehearse for your audience. They're the ones that are going to get the benefit of you working, you putting in the time and rehearsing, right? You get the secondary benefit of doing something great for your audience. And then, obviously by improving your communication, you're going to improve the results you achieve through that communication. And that's going to be a benefit to you. But, it all starts with being your very best for your audience. Miles Davis is a famous jazz trumpeter from the United States. And this is a line he says, sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself. Think about that. So many times you get up and you're presenting and you're actually presenting like somebody else. You're not presenting like your true self. And so the only way you can find that is through rehearsal. And this is, the whole concept of becoming the best you for your audience. And this is, so rehearsal, again, now we're kind of shifting this perspective of going from, hey, I'm rehearsing so I don't mess up my presentation, to I'm rehearsing so I can be my very best so that I can provide more value to my audience. So I think by this point, my conclusion here is pretty obvious, right? Rehearsal is important, and rehearsal is very important. So what does that mean? It means, having this attitude that you're going to be constantly raising the bar, constantly trying to do better and better. And again, not just for yourself, but for your audience. So here's the big question, right? As part of the preparation time, how much time do you spend putting your content together, and how much time do you spend actually rehearsing? And my mission in life is to get this to the magic formula of 50-50. That when you're preparing, you spend half your preparation time putting your content together and the other half actually rehearsing. Because it's so critical if you think about it. That giving a presentation is a physical act, right? Your body's moving, your mouth, your brain, everything has to work together. And if you don't rehearse that, you're never going to get better. You're never going to learn your strengths and weaknesses. So it's critical. But I have to be honest with you. So I've probably, for this presentation, I've used some other parts of things. So I've probably spent 12 hours preparing for this. Preparing for this. And to be honest, I'm probably more in the 75-25 range where I'm at. I probably spent about 75% of my time with the content and messing around with my slides, and only about 25% rehearsing. But to be honest with you, this rehearsing, it has more than 25% impact. Because actually, I worked with another speaker here, and we actually presented to each other. We actually rehearsed this together, and we both came away with making some pretty substantial changes in our presentation. So it was a great opportunity. So I'm saying this in that I set up the magic formula that this should be our goal. That 50% of the time, you're putting your content together, and the remaining time you're actually rehearsing. And just as a reminder, editing your slides is not rehearsing, or writing notes in the PowerPoint is not rehearsing, right? Rehearsing is being in your presentation mode, whether it's in front of a camera, if it's standing up, moving around. It's being as realistic as possible to your presentation. So again, that doesn't count. So this is, for me, actually, that's that extra 25%. I was messing with my slides most of the time, so I had to stop doing that. So is there any doubt that I believe that we should be rehearsing more for every presentation? So that, again, this is this shift in perspective of looking at your communication opportunity, your next presentation, not just as 30 minutes to talk to someone, but it's really 30 minutes to be your very best for your audience. And so how do we do that? So the remainder of my presentation, we're really going to talk about some areas of focus, and then I have some approaches that I share with my clients that you can then take and apply to your own rehearsal and your own performance. So when we rehearse, you think about it, the first thing you need to have is the right mindset, right? You need to be, realize that rehearsing is important. You have to be, understanding that you're here to create value for your audience. And most important, you need to have, everything ready to go, your content, your slides, everything. You're in this right mindset that you're not in creation mode now. You're in rehearsal mode. And the biggest thing we want to do from a rehearsal standpoint is move from a recitation of your content, reading a script or just kind of, going from bullets, but kind of repeating the same thing over and over again, to making it a conversation. That, I don't know how many people we have online today, but I'm sure it's a couple hundred or so. But, thinking that, when I tell my clients, I remind them, it's like, I'm not speaking 1 to 200 people. Actually, I'm speaking to each and every one of you. I'm 1 to 1, 200 times. right? Or more or less. But it's, because each of you are having an individual experience, right? And we're both having a conversation together, individually as we go along. So this is the important thing to remember. So as you're rehearsing, you want to be getting to the point where you're comfortable having a conversation. And again, how can you have a conversation if you're not focused on your audience? And this goes back to this whole idea of how do we make sure that what we're doing is for the benefit of the audience, and we're focused on that, and that we're focused on engaging our audience, and that I'm focused on engaging you. And how do we do that? It's what we say, but it's also how we say it, right? It's we're going to talk about things about creating these pauses that we actually time for our audience to engage with each other. I'm sorry. So engagement is critical, because you cannot communicate. A presentation doesn't happen unless your audience is engaged and you're engaged as well. And then we focus on internalizing your content, not so you know what to say, but also more important, like the structure. That you understand how your presentation lays out, right? Because most cases there's more than one presentation in your presentation. There's the beginning, the three acts, and then an ending. So it's understanding this content, and not just what you're saying, but the structure behind that. And then the final rehearsal focus is about building confidence. I call it confidence through control. You know that what you're doing is right, and you're comfortable doing that. And the more confident you are, that comes across your audience, and that creates, again, leads to stronger engagement and audience focus. So when you think about, next time you have to go and rehearse, the whole idea is like, okay, let me kind of click through these focus areas and make sure that we're going the right way. And you'll start seeing that, there's internal in terms of how you think, but then there's external, like how you move and the dynamics and how you speak along those lines. So from this focus leads to, the actual rehearsing. And when over the years, I've been both a creative director and producer of large corporate events for over 30 years, and as a speech coach for over 10 years. And so over the years, I've kind of developed a lot of these different approaches that I've worked with my clients. And so much of it is, just kind of trying things out and coming up with new things. And so I'd like to share with you now several of these kind of approaches that I use with my clients. The first one is practice like you play, right? We've talked about, if you're going to rehearse, you don't just punch through your slides, right? You actually rehearse and deliver your talk and deliver your presentation, and you're in a live venue as much as you can. So this is, kind of shows like these musicians. I love this picture that, they're playing, and you want to practice the same way. You want to do this with energy and everything that you have. So, so next time you think about your rehearsing, think about, okay, am I really trying to emulate what the real life situation is going to be about? Am I in game mode, or full performance mode right now as we rehearse? Because if you're not getting the most out of your rehearsal. This is a really critical approach. It's called, what is your role? And if you think about it, in every presentation you're going to have at least one role. And what I always ask is, so are you a leader? Are you a teacher? Are you a coach? Are you a teammate? Right, that you're speaking to each other. Or my personal favorite, are you a provocateur? Are you there to bring up questions, bring up ideas that force people to have to join the discussion and to look at things in a new way? And so when I work with my clients, it's pretty much we track out their presentation, because in most cases you're going to have more than one role. You may start out as the leader and issuing the goals and the visions, the desired end state, and then you may turn into the teacher, teaching people the information that they need to do to act, and then you may become the coach at the end, to support them as they're acting. So, think about this role as you go through. And the cool thing is, if you think about it, it's like, okay, I'm here. My role, I believe, is, somewhat, coach and a little bit of a teacher. And that changes how you present. If I switch to being leader mode, but I'm trying to do a tool, but I'm trying to persuade you to go somewhere different. But if you think you're presenting as a leader, you're going to present as a leader. You're going to present differently than if you were presenting as a coach or a teacher. And so this, it's kind of this mindset, that you set. So the key thing is identifying the role that you have for your presentation, and then rehearse that. Typically, people ask me Cliff, if you have one thing to say about, how to help people give better presentations. And I say, the first thing you have to think about is recognize that when you're presenting, your perception of time is completely out of whack. Right? That, for most people, it seems like time is going so much faster than it actually is. And unfortunately, that leads to so many problems in presenting, right? It's, you start chasing, your mind goes ahead to think about what you're going to say next because you're so worried about that because things are going so fast. And then what happens is your mind goes ahead to think about the next thing and leaves your mouth behind. And then your mouth without your brain is not your friend, right? This is where the disfluencies, the ums and the ahs start happening. And so it's so important to be, in the moment and be present. And so I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, in the United States, which is kind of a, rough and tumble city a little bit, but now I live in California, so I get to say this. So what I encourage my clients to do is sync with the pulse of the universe. And this means, if you think about it, there is this pulse that happens. And for me, I'm a drummer, a very amateur drummer. But when you rehearse drumming, you have to use a metronome. So I actually have my clients work with a metronome, and I have them set it to 45 beats per minute, which is a beat every second and a half. And so what this does, it becomes this pulse that it's not there to make them speak slowly, but it's there just to remind them what time really is. And that if you stop talking for a beat or two, nothing bad happens, right? Actually, good things happen. This is where your audience can digest what you just said and think about it. This is for you to gather your thoughts and think about what you're going to say next. And so this is. I'll pause 1 second. Apologize for that. So owning time, we just took a little time, and I own that. So this whole idea of thinking about your perspective of time as you're speaking, it's critical. And what tends to happen is, as you're trying to become more adjusted to this, letting time go by, it's not a comfortable feeling. I have lots of jokes with my clients. I tell them at this point, if it feels good, you're probably doing it wrong at this point. What you want is, to have, go through that kind of period of being uncomfortable, and then you realize I own time. Time works for me. I don't work for time. Another technique that I work with my clients, this approach, I call it, backward and nonlinear rehearsal. So think about it. How often most people, when they rehearse, they open up PowerPoint or whatever, and they start in the beginning and they try to make it to the end. And in my experience, half the time you never make it to the end, because you run into a slide thing or you want to change something or all these kind of things. So what tends to happen is people have really good beginnings to their talks, their presentations, but by the end, they've run out because they've never really dedicated the time to rehearse that. So the first thing I do with my clients is basically rehearse their talks backwards. If you're using slides, it's easy. You start with the last slide, deliver that slide. Go to the slide before that, deliver the slide for that. And what this does is really shifts your whole perspective to start seeing your talk not as one long, 20, 30-minute dialogue of you talking. It's really it's each slide or each section, especially what we do in terms of, if you're not doing slides, it's more of a, think about we talk about your talk being in different parts, so your introduction or your act 1, act 2, act 3. And so you rehearse this in a nonlinear fashion. Sometimes we just, I get out a random number generator and we just kind of, we number the parts in the talk, and then we just kind of randomly pick a number and we rehearse that. And so it's, you may, rehearse, act 3, and then you go to your intro, and then you go to your conclusion, then you go to act 2. So again, all this helps you understand the structure, and that each moment, each part, you feel confident and in control for each one. And again, and your audience is going to appreciate it. And it really is, it's more important to rehearse your ending than it is to rehearse your introduction. because the what your audience is going to remember is the last thing that you said, not so much the first thing that you said. This is a kind of a trickier approach, especially when in the world of business where perfection is expected. But in communication, there's it's this approach I call embracing imperfection. And I love this quote from John Ruskin, who was a British art critic in the 18th century. And he said, in all things that live, there are certain irregularities and deficiencies which are not only signs of life, but sources of beauty. To banish imperfection is to destroy expression, to check exertion, to paralyze vitality. So what this says is that, by making mistakes, we're showing that we're human, and that by being human, we're being, better connecting with our audiences. Everyone, at some point in time, right, the robots are going to be taking over and giving these talks to each other. And they're going to be really boring because humans are going to be, the robots will be perfect. And it's not, and it doesn't resonate with us, right? They're not expressing an emotion as much as, just reading from a script in a perfect way. So, if you think about it, and I'm guessing I'm a good example, and I'm filled with imperfections in what I'm doing. But what I tend to be very good at is, expressing my emotions and how I'm feeling about things. And, through that makes a stronger connection than a perfect presentation of my words. And so, this approach is really, to be not afraid to fail, right? Or even more important, to push your boundaries, which is what the next approach that I have. I call boundary busting. So everyone has certain limits and comfort zones, right? So how you're speaking, the emotion you put into it, your dynamic range that you have. And so as you're rehearsing, identify these boundaries, and go. It's like, I tend to be kind of soft spoken when I rehearse or when I speak. So I'm going to really project myself and be louder. Or, I tend to be very logical and, boring in this. I need to bring more emotion about what I do. And so, when you push these boundaries, this is how you get better, right? And if you play a sport or an instrument, you push to failure, and then you pull it back, and then that's where you find that magic spot where you are on the edge of your boundaries, because you always want to be pushing them. Because another key thing to remember, you don't rehearse to be perfect, right? You want to rehearse to fail. And, because by failing, this is how you get better, right? I can rehearse and just do the same thing and become a mediocre presenter, very quickly and never change. But the problem is, every time I give a presentation or a speech or a conversation, I'm not getting the full value from that. I'm not performing the way I should. But by pushing myself and rehearsing and pushing myself to fail, I'm actually learning and getting better. So this whole idea of presenting and giving this perfect talk is really not the most important thing, because it's a successful presentation is not an exchange of information or transference of information. It's a transference of belief and emotion as much as information. And the only way you can share your beliefs and emotions is by being you. Now, let's get into a couple more these are a little more tactical things. But again, what's so important when you present is, it is a physical performance. And so what that means is, how you react physically, what you do has an impact on how you present. So a lot of questions I get is, what do you do with your hands? How do I stand? All this kind of things. And so my recommendation when you're standing up giving a presentation is to be in a I call balanced athletic stance. What you're taught when you play a sport, right? So it's feet hips width apart, little bend of the knees, weight on the balls of your feet. So you're kind of giving that lean into your audience. And if you're seated, it's the same exact thing, except you're seated, but it's you're standing up, you're sitting up straight, head over shoulders, shoulders over hips, your feet on the floor, and this way you're grounded and you're not moving. And so when you're presenting from this stance, it gives you this kind of power stance and everything, but also puts you in position to be able to move more effectively. And so you go from this balanced stance, you take a few steps, and then you go back into your balanced stance. And what's really helpful is if you tend to be a pacer, which, I maybe about 2/3 of the people I work with, they like to pace back and forth, or they like to shift their weight back and forth, which is all a distraction to your audience. So you want to, like being in this balanced stance, this gets you grounded and ready to go. And then the final approach that I always get questions about are about hands. So what do I do with my hands? Everyone has that question, and there's a lot of good advice out there. And so I've come up with 2 rules and a guidance. So rule number 1 is no pockets. And for some reason, it's not a great look for your audience. I don't believe it shows respect to them that you want to be showing. And it also, for some reason, people like to keep keys or coins in their pockets, and next thing you know, you're jingling on stage, and everyone's wondering where that noise is coming from. And so no pockets. And sometimes people have that the one hand in the pocket and their clicker out, which is again, if that's what you have to do, that's fine. But it's again, it's much better to not have your hands in your pockets. And then so that's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is no obscene gestures. So which makes sense, right? But for me, what that means is don't worry about your hands. But what you want to worry about, you want to be aware of what you're doing with your hands. So if I'm giving this talk and I'm going, hey, I'm flapping my arms like a chicken, I should probably stop doing that, right? Or so this is being aware and being present of what you're doing. And so this non-obscene gestures is so be you, use your hands the way you like to, but just be aware that if you are doing something like the disco move or something like that, that it's going to become a distraction to your audience, and that you should stop doing that. So noticing, and then and I joke, I make this thing about them seeing gestures without a joke, but actually I've had to enforce it a few times. Sometimes there's a client that likes to keep his finger up, but a different finger when he's using a clicker, or more importantly, people with glasses, they tend to use a different finger to put their glasses back on. And I had this one client, and this was at a big user conference, and he's on the image magnification. His head was 30 feet across, and he's up there, basically making a gesture to the audience. So fortunately, we caught that in rehearsal, and that's what rehearsal is good for. So that's the hands, the 2 rules. So no pockets, no obscene gestures, be aware of what you're doing. And then the general guidance is above the waist, right? So keep your hands, up and above. And how do you do them? You put the little cage, one hand up, one hand down. Those are all things, try to be as natural as possible, but just kind of being aware of if you're doing something that is either connecting you or distracting your audience. So those are the two issues on hands and guidance, and the whole idea of just being aware. They call it the fig leaf pose, or the football/soccer penalty kick pose. You want to definitely avoid that. So rehearsal needs to be a concerted effort, right? It needs to be plan that you have and that you execute. And so I've kind of identified this rehearsal ladder, how you can, I should have started at bottom, but you want to go up, right? And so, you always begin with preparation, right? Getting your materials together, getting the right mindset. And then you do your first pass. And this actually can be several times. You want to repeat this, right? This is where you start becoming more familiar with the content. You start seeing the structure and you start working through that. And then when you've kind of gotten it roughed in, you go back and you check your bag. So in jazz music, the musicians would say, "Hey man, I got your bag." That means that they know your tricks that you have. That in this song you're going to play this like this. And it's the same thing for you as a presenter. Everyone has their bag of tricks, whether we realize it or not. It's how do we tend to pause in a certain way? Do we have the same cadence? Do we have these arm gestures that we use too much? Right. So this is going back and kind of looking at yourself. And I'm not a super fan of videotaping yourself all the time. But this is a great way, when you're watching a video of yourself, you start seeing your bag of tricks. And then, from there, you start boundary busting, right? This is identifying areas that you can start pushing, whether it's dynamics and or emotion or confidence, all these different things that you can do. And then you keep going and you repeat, and then you get from better to best. And this is where we get into this, I call it speechifying 2.0 criteria, right? Where it is this exchange, transference of emotion. It's not just information, right? So this is where, you go from an okay presentation to an amazing presentation. And then there's the final touches, just getting everything ready, understanding where you are, doing a proper technology check, all these different kind of things. So this is, the plan I use with my clients. You can come up with your own plan. The important thing is that you have a plan. And so finally, the last part, of preparation, I call it stick the landing, which comes from, if you ever watch, I'm sure they use the same term in different languages, but if you watch gymnastics, this is they got to stick the landing. And this is what you want to do with your presentation. And because so often I have, presenters go, and this is why this is important. Thank you very much. And they walk and they run off the stage, right? But what you want to do is, like I said, the last thing your audience is going to hear from you is what they're going to remember most. So what you want to do is repeat your key conclusion. For me, it's like change your perspective about rehearsing. So that's my final thought, right? And so I'm going to say, change your perspective about rehearsing. And then you go 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. Thank you very much. Or you don't say thank you. There's like two crowds, the thank you, the no thank you people. But I'm a thank you person in that it's telling your audience that you're done. And that they, again, what can you do nice to your audience? That they know that you just concluded your talk. So the key thing is, again, when you're done, you want to stick the landing. And, there's this great saying, again, there's so many, I always try to get the right attribution for quotes, but there's so many people that have this one. But this whole idea of plan the work and work the plan. So if you walk into your rehearsal with a plan and you do it, you're going to get better. You are going to improve your performance. You are going to deliver more value for your audience, and you are going to create communication success. This culture of communication success where you keep getting better and better and better. Thank you. So I just stuck the landing, hopefully. And now, when I do these presentations like this, a lot of people have questions, and I'm thinking we do, and they all, again, you have 13 minutes of a speech coach, and ask me any question. Ask the coach, or if you want, I could say stump the coach. Ask me a question, I can't answer anything. So do
Awesome.
we
Yes.
questions?
So we actually have plenty of questions, and I also, because I was also listening to the session, and I was noting down some things as we were discussing with you during one of our tech checks. The preparation and in general the rehearsal is what will prepare you not to fail, right? And one thing that actually stuck with me here is what you mentioned around that rehearsal is not about perfection, but it's about seeing where you're about to fail. So I think that's really could be used to change someone's mindset as to why they should be rehearsing. For me, honestly, that was very much an eye opener, even though it's something very small. But we have some questions
But so
here.
actually, think the saying again. I like so rehearse to fail, present to succeed.
That's a very good one. I will steal this one. um, there are a lot of questions actually, and I would like to start with one which is, I think, quite common. Is there something that's called too much rehearsal? How much rehearsal is actually too much? Is there such thing?
There's too much bad rehearsal. But if you think about it, that's why I do a lot of all these different approaches, and you come up with this plan that in the beginning, yeah, you can you want to rehearse every part, all these kind of things. To you get to a point where you're at a point where all you're going to rehearse is transitions, from going from one thing to the next, or there's this one slide that's very complicated that you're going to work on how to simplify that. And so it's more of you can rehearse if all you're doing is, like I said, starting with the first slide, going to the end, repeat, then you're bored and you're not going to get any better. So it's more of you can't rehearse correctly too much, but it's more of like, again, being aware of your strengths, weaknesses, and working on those, and on key points of your presentation.
And actually, this brings me to another question that we have here, which is how do you track space for improvements? Meaning, how do you really rehearse in a correct manner where you know where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are? What would be your advice there?
Um, it really, so come up with your own measures in way of, when you feel better about rehearsing, because it's very subjective, right? I mean, it's more, the most important is like, how do you feel when it's done? And when and overall in my approach, I have 4 measures of success, which is engagement, clarity, alignment, and value. And so in rehearsing, this is the idea of, are you engaging your audience? Are you present? Are they present? Are you bringing them into the conversation? And then clarity is, are you speaking clearly with just the right words to say the right thing? And then alignment is this idea of, getting people going in the same direction. And that typically means you have a clear vision and goal and directions for them to have. And then at the end is, did you create value? At the end of your talk, is everyone going to go at, in 14, no, whatever, in a few minutes, everyone's going to go, wow, this along with all the other great presentations was, the best time I've spent so far today. That I'm happy that I spent these 45 minutes with Cliff. And that's your measure of success. Not, wow, I'll never get this time back again, which unfortunately is too often an outcome to too many people.
Yeah.
So but I think what again, it's, set your goals, set your plan, and come up with your measures of what you think is important for your audience, and then track that.
Yep, fully agree. Because we have a lot of people from companies in the technical space. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we are seeing here a question that is kind of the most popular one here in the Q&A section, which says that rehearsal is a benefit for your audience, and I agree that, but how do you convince people, especially from the technical environment, that the audience needs more than the facts and it's therefore worth it to rehearse? So maybe it could also be a general question as to how do you convince people that they need to rehearse?
Right. Well, the first thing to remember is that technical people are people too, right? That they have, even though they have this technical background, one of my, again, saying is belief drives behavior and emotion drives belief. So people act based on what they believe, which, so you technical people think, they believe that this is, what's important is all this technical information, but they believe that because they have this strong emotional attachment to it, right? That they feel that it's important. And so then therefore they're going to act that way. So how can you help these technical people realize that they're talking to people as well? And again, I think putting it in this kind of framework of engagement and clarity, and this whole idea of the value you're creating for your audience, so that they don't need, your audience doesn't need you to read the whole technical specs of this product or of everything. They need to know how it helps them solve their problems, because that's what they care about. That's what their emotional things that they feel about. So it's really, and also using, helping them rehearse in a way that's, again, pointed toward your audience and what they need. I think is critical. And the other way to help do that, this is more of a content thing, is but to ask them to boil down their presentation into their conclusions. There's primary messages and secondary messages. And so what are the, at the end of their talk, what are the 5 key messages that their audience needs to have? And then all the technical information is the secondary messages that support that. And as needed, you provide that. But it's usually, you need a lot less of those secondary. The stronger your conclusions, the less backup you need, and that less secondary messages. So really working with technical people, having them flip things around from going evidence, 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 therefore conclusion, to conclusion, here's some backup. Here's a little bit of evidence to back it up.
Yeah. Okay. I fully agree with that. There is an interesting question here. How do you balance between rehearsing your content and leaving room for improvisation on the spot versus memorizing your notes and getting a panic attack when you forget the next line?
So the whole thing is, unless you're giving a teleprompted script, do not ever write a script. That's because what tends to happen is, we fall in love with the words we write, and we want to try to memorize all that. We want to repeat that. So the whole thing is, you should never, when you rehearse, without a script, in a lot of ways, you should never deliver the same presentation twice. It should always be different each time, a little bit. And this is where that whole concept of owning time comes in. So if you're comfortable letting time go by, then it helps your brain, think about what you're going to say next. And so those pauses. So it is, and so you want to have your structure, you want to have kind of your prompts and your bullets. But then from an improvisation point, I always recommend improvising in between the sections, right? So don't try to improvise in the middle as you're talking about something, but improvise, from one slide to the next, or in between sections, and that allows you to be in the moment and make some more comments. But that's so instead of again, scripting improvisation, you just let it happen.
Absolutely. And what happens in the case? Because I see another question here, and I think it might be valid for a lot of people. If you have to deliver several presentations within a week in a business environment, and you have little to no time for rehearsal, so how do you approach that situation? If you want to go to that 50-50, 50% of the time
Mm-hmm.
spent on content and 50% on rehearsals.
So, part of it is going through those multiple presentations and identifying the key elements, the key areas, or the key challenges for you. And so it is, taking this up to the next level of just kind of being more spot rehearsing the things that you may have, it may not, because a lot of corporate presentations are a little formulaic, and maybe your introductions similar throughout. So what are the key parts of that presentation that you're giving that are different than all the rest? And then, so again, focus on rehearsing that. Or the other kind of thing to think about is like, okay, I know this content backwards and forwards and everything like that. So pick some areas again. So you don't need an hour to rehearse something. You can say, hey, in this 10 minutes, I'm going to rehearse this section, but I'm going to shift my role from a leader or from a salesperson to a teammate, and I'm going to try it this way. And so again, it's more experimentation, more pushing your boundaries. A lot of people, and it's more like and shifting that perspective a little bit more, because some people present every day, they know they're great, they get good, they get good survey results and everything like that, and which is all great for you, but you can do better. And so it's all, you want to again shift this idea of, hey, I've got this down pat, to, hey, where can I push my boundaries and fail, push to fail and then succeed. I forgot the saying, rehearse to fail and present to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And here actually comes a question, which is also very interesting for me, and I obviously it's interesting for the audience. What is the most difficult thing to change in a presenter's behavior according to your work?
I think it's confidence
Okay.
for people. This is the hard part again, because if, let's say, you don't have a lot of confidence, and I'm here telling you to go fail, it's difficult, right? But it is this idea of failing, pushing, and coming back stronger and more confident from that. And I think that's so many of these things are these kind of this this wall that you need to get through, and once you break through that wall, it's that then it becomes easy. So it's probably the hardest thing is to get people to be confident. And all the other things, there's people pace too much on stage, all these kind of things. So much of that comes from being confident and being aware, and letting the saying, let the game come to you, or let the presentation come to you.
Yeah, so really being present in the moment, as someone was writing in the chat, because I was also monitoring the chat, and that awareness really is kind of probably the hardest thing to know, and to be in sync also with time and the time that you have for your presentation. Well, thank you so much, Cliff, for this very very I think, very insightful session on rehearsing, and I really hope that people have understood why it is so important to rehearse your presentations to succeed. I will take that. I will take that phrase because I liked it quite a lot. Maybe we will use it. I don't know. We will. You will tell me if we have the if
I'm
we
gonna
have the
I'm gonna
right.
go get the URL right now. So you got
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this. I think it was very insightful, and I see already here people writing in the chat for how insightful the presentation was. There is a material which we need to share for you, which my colleague Kaloyan just shared, which is the components of the correct rehearsals. Right, that's the PDF, so everyone
it.
can download it and check it.
Yep, it's part of it's the focus areas and then kind of the the ladder. I call it components in the workout. And
Yeah.
so again, this is my ending quote is from Vince Lombardi, one of the founders of the National Football League. It says perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence. And I believe we can all catch excellence through rehearsing and rehearsing to fail and presenting to succeed.